today we're going to be taking a look back at what was a very active year in InfoBurst development in the year 2021. Let's just make sure we're on the right thing here. Okay. So for those that don't know me, my name is Bryan Baca. My title at InfoSol is the InfoSol product manager, but if you know me, my job, my life is InfoBurst. I do all things InfoBurst. If you were involved in a trial of the product, I help customers with that. I work with our customers on support issues, training, consulting, even a bit of development. So I've got my fingers all over InfoBurst. So let's just start with why, how 2021 started and why it was significant. The first version of InfoBurst that came out in 2021 was in February, and most significantly, InfoBurst for the first time moved to a 64-bit architecture. Hold on one moment. There we go. For all of time, and InfoBurst as a product through its various iterations goes back nearly 20 years, was always a 32-bit application. And this was largely because InfoBurst traditionally interacts with systems like business objects, where the older versions only support 32-bit. And so we kind of held off over the years moving to 64-bit as long as we could to accommodate for those customers that were on legacy systems. But the need to move ahead, move forward, and modernize to 64-bit finally came to a head, and we made the decision starting in 2021 to move InfoBurst to 64-bit. So we'll talk about all the features that then allowed us to develop and offer in the product. But primarily, moving to 64-bit meant that InfoBurst as an application could take advantage of more system resources, right? CPU and RAM. So what that means generally is faster performance of InfoBurst and better memory allocation. So for those of you that do excuse me, those of you that do data extraction, let's say you have a big Webby report and you deliver that as a large CSV file, or you run queries and anything that involves large data, there were limitations under 32-bit because it can only use so much memory. Those limitations are now gone. So that's one clear initial benefit of moving to the 64-bit architecture. And with the introduction of the first 64-bit version, we decided to change our InfoBurst naming scheme or naming convention. For any of those that have been around for a while, you know that when new versions of InfoBurst came out, we called them builds, build 238, 239, 240. We moved to something more conventional starting in 2021, where we're naming them with the year, the major version. So the first version of 2021 was 2021.1, and then you may end up seeing a dot something, which is a minor version, right? So that's the new convention going forward. Hopefully it's more easy to understand. These are the versions in 2021. There were 4 of them, so 2021.1 and .2 and .3. So that's the convention to look for going forward. And then just a note to those of you that are still on the last 32-bit version, which is build 240, we are no longer releasing updates for the 32-bit version. So build 240, I think FixPack 6 which was released in December of 2020, was the last version of build 240 we'll release. So if you're looking to take advantage of new features or maybe fixes, you will be moving forward or migrating to 64-bit. And I'll direct you some documentation that we'll need to make that migration just a little later in the presentation. So, and again, before we get into features, because that's really what we're talking about in this webinar, we also changed the InfoBurst installer with the introduction of 64-bit. So we streamlined things. The old installer was kind of fat, several hundred megabytes, and we've now slimmed that down to just under 100 megabytes. So quick to download, quick to run. The installation itself takes probably 30 seconds, 40 seconds, right? Not much to do there. Before, you had to, if you were installing a new InfoBurst server, install the required .NET framework. InfoBurst is a .NET application and it requires a certain framework. And you used to have to do that manually as a prerequisite. Now, the new installer will do that for you automatically. And again, in the 32-bit versions, you had to install, you had 2 files, one for installation, one for update, and this tended to cause a lot of confusion among our users. So now the new installer, starting with 2021.1, one file does it all. You download 2021.1, it'll install it, the platform new, or if you've got an existing installation, it will update it automatically. And you know what, as I'm looking at my windows over here on the side, I did forget to mention that as you're watching the presentation, if you have questions, especially if they're on the topic that we're covering, put them into that question and answer section, and I want to make sure that we get all those addressed at the end of the presentation. And then finally, as part of the installation process, not an update, an installation, before, when the installation completed, you had to go onto the server at a command line level and create a repository, right? So the installer installed the software, but the repository you had to do manually afterwards. That is now automatic. By default, InfoBurst is going to install with a SQLite repository, and then at the end of the installation, it will launch into what is our new repository management section. I'm actually going to show you that a little bit later. And so the point here is that you no longer have to take that manual step on the server to configure either a new repository or connect to an existing repository. You'll be able to do that from our UI at the end of the installation. So we're trying to remove as much as possible the need for administrators to have to remote into the server and do things at a command line level. And again, build 240 users, there is a process. Technically, moving from build 240 to a 64-bit version is a migration because you're going from 32-bit to 64-bit, but it's not nearly as painful as it sounds, a migration. It's actually very seamless, very straightforward. There is an article on the Infosol help desk. So if you go to help.infosol.com and search 64-bit migration or just 64-bit, you'll find the article, and it's going to tell you everything you need to know to prepare and execute a migration, an in-place migration for InfoBurst. And if you have a QR code scanner, that QR code will take you directly to that article. If, as you're preparing to make this jump from 32-bit to 64-bit and you have questions, please reach out to us, go to the help desk, open a ticket. We're happy to help. We've had lots of users go through this process. All have found it very seamless, very straightforward. Okay. All right, so let's get into the actual new versions that we released in 2021, starting with InfoBurst 2021.1. So the first version of 64-bit was released in February of 2021. And actually, before I start here, I always like to preach this. I'm showing you the versions that we released in last year. Don't upgrade to these. If you're going from build 240 or any version that you're on, we always encourage you to go to the latest available version. So you might see a feature in a version, say, oh, I'm going to update to that. Don't do that. Always go to the latest release. That way you're getting the most current code, and we have the ability to issue fixes should the need arise, because we don't patch old versions. So yeah, so also in 2022.1, we saw the introduction of support for the first BI 4.3 version, which was SPO1. Okay, so for those of you that use the built-in InfoBurst portal, where you can deliver and host content for end users, you know that the portal is available at a separate URL, a separate address from the main UI, right? That has not changed in 64-bit. You still have a separate endpoint for portal users where they only see the portal. They don't see anything else related to InfoBurst. But for ease of use, we have also added the portal into the main user interface. So you can use one, which is the standalone portal, or you can interact with the same portal from within the standard user interface. So there at the bottom right of the screen, and if you're using 64-bit, you've seen it. There it is, portal. You can jump right in and do things in the portal. In 2021.1, we introduced the ability to export a multi-column list in Excel format. That several users asked for that. And I'm not going to show you every one of these features. We introduced a lot of functionality in 2021. For any of these bullet items, go into the help desk. It's pretty easy to go in and find what you're looking for in terms of assistance. If you have a question, pop it into the Q&A here, or just log a ticket. We're happy to help. But I will be demonstrating these kind of the marquee features of 2021. In this version, you saw the addition of the ability for a Webby parameter and a burst to go in and select from a list of values. As I mentioned in the introduction, in 64-bit, you now have the ability to manage repositories within the user interface. So traditionally, in 32-bit versions, this process of creating a repository, switching to an existing repository management in general was done by an administrator on the server, so remote session on the server at a command line, right? So a bit cumbersome. In 64-bit, we eliminated the need for that. You can still manage repositories using the command line interface. That's still there, but now you're able to do that from the main user interface as an administrator. And with that, you'll also see the ability to automatically restart InfoBurst when a setting change requires it. This was also something that administrator had to do on the server, obviously. Log into the server, open the services panel, restart service. So if you change a setting in InfoBurst as an administrator that requires a restart, you no longer have to log into the UI or the server. It's all done from the UI, and I'll actually show you an example of that. So let's look at, make sure we're in the right one here. So let's just log in. And here under System, if you're moving to 64-bit for the first time, you'll see this repository section. And from here, we can do standard repository management. We can create a repository, or we can connect to an existing repository. So let's just do that as an example of both repository management, which we'll do. We'll just create a quick, simple SQLite. We'll call this demo repo, right? Just a quick blank repository. So I'm creating a repository and I'm creating a connection to the repository here, but I'm not switching to it. That is a separate action. So I'm still in my standard IB repo repository, but now I would like to switch to this repository, this new blank repo I've created. So with the switch button, InfoBurst will go out, connect to the demo repo, restart the InfoBurst service, and then come right back up to the login page. That used to require me at a command line on the server, entering switch repository commands, create repository, and then going into the services panel, restarting the services. That's now all done with the click of a button from the UI. You no longer have to log into the server. So now I'll just log in here because this is a completely blank repository, no configuration. But we don't want that for our demo, so I'm actually going to switch back. And IB repo is my standard repository. I'll switch back to that. So all very seamless, and hopefully that makes life just a bit easier for the administrators. So we'll log back in here. Okay. Now, in addition to switching repositories, any configuration setting that you change that requires a service restart, you'll be alerted to that requirement in the UI, and you'll have a button to restart the service right there. So wherever we require a restart, you'll now be able to just click a button and do that without touching the server. And actually, I need just a moment to take a sip of water. Okay. All right, so 2021.1, we're still in that version, and let's talk about the review. So if you came from the 32-bit world, build 240 or earlier, you might know this feature as content validation. And so when we moved to 64-bit, we kind of wanted to tighten things up. And so we looked at our naming conventions and we decided to change content validation to review, because review now encompasses several features that we're going to talk about. So what was known as content validation is now just known as review, same functionality. If you used content validation or review, to leverage this feature, you had to go to a separate portal, separate from the main user interface. So for ease of use, we have simply moved the portal into the main UI. So you no longer have to go to a separate address. It's just a menu option, as you can see here on the bottom right, in the main user interface. Actually, and before we move on, for those of you that don't know what this is, this validation feature, review, gives you the ability to, let's say I have a burst and we deliver to email recipients. Email's sensitive, right? Because you only get one shot at it. Once that email goes out, it's gone. And so this review feature allows you to opt in to generate the content. So the burst runs on a schedule. All the emails, all the content is generated, but it's not sent out. It is held in the review portal. Then a user, a nominated user, will go in, review the content, right? They can look at the emails, they can look at the content and ensure that everything looks good, right? We can open up the reports, eyeball the content. And once we're happy that it looks good and it's ready to go, we can approve the delivery, and that content that's been held is now sent out to the users. We're not rerunning anything. Hold it, approve it or deny it. And if you approve, it sends out that held content. That's what review is. And in 2021.1, we have expanded that functionality to add what we call test email, which I'll show you now. So test email is essentially what I just described, but it doesn't involve the approval or denial process. It is simply testing a burst, right? So if you think about email, it's a unique animal, right? How do you test an email delivery in a burst without actually sending the content to the end users, right? Test email feature now allows for that. So let's go in here to the demo folder and let's see. Here we go, review. So I've created a burst, and this burst has actually 2 email deliveries. What we're doing here is, and actually that one's not named correctly. I'm just gonna name that here, Excel. So what we're doing here is we're sending to recipients an email that has the content attached as an Excel, but is also rendered inline in the email message. And our goal here is to configure the burst, production ready with the actual recipients, run it, produce the content, but don't send it to the end users. Store it so that we can go in and look at it. Think of it as a test mode for email. The InfoBurst or the burst is running end to end. It's doing everything, producing the emails, producing the content, but it never sends it. With this option enabled, you can go into the review portal, look at it, and make sure that what you've built is producing the correct content to the correct recipients. So to enable this feature, we go into the options tab on the burst and check test email and save. I'll actually run this in real time so you can see what this looks like. And I want you to see this because the steps that you'll see in the activity log are key, right? So what you'd normally see in a burst like this are a bunch of queue emails and send emails. What you see with this feature enabled is save email. So we're still generating the message and the content, but we're storing it. We're not sending it. But these were actual production recipients that we generated the messages for. So let me close that. So now we come up here to the top menu and select review. This section here on the left is all about review. We're not going to be looking at that today. That's the hold and then approve or reject the delivery. If we select test email, this is what resulted. So here in this test email section, we can see the burst we just ran. And if I click on it, on the right-hand side, we see the actual recipients, email messages, and any attached content. So you can see this burst sent to 3 different recipients, myself, John, and Paul. And each user I know from this burst got a different state. So here, if I select John, for example, he got Florida. And I can look at this and say, okay, yep, that's right. I got everything correct. My data source, my recipients, And sure enough, the email is to John. It is for Florida data, and there's the actual content, right? This is the actual email. And then if there are attachments, we can review those as well. So in addition to the inline content, John got an Excel file for Florida. I can actually download that Excel, open it, and view it just as a user would, and validate that way as well. So think of it as testing for email, right? And hopefully this will streamline things in your development process for the burst. And actually, I'm going to answer that now, Kirk, since I saw the question come in. Yes. Yep. There's no limit on the number of recipients. It's going to be an extremely long drop-down list, but that's the point, right? Generate all that content, don't send it. And hopefully you're not having to go in and look at those emails one by one. But the answer yes is yeah, or the answer is yes, Kirk, to that question. Okay. All right. That's test email. What else do we have here? Okay, so let's move on to the second version that was released in 2021, which is 2021.2. That was released very shortly after the first version in March of 2021. And this is because, we had just made the jump to 64-bit. And in addition to several features we wanted to get out, we just had some fixes that we needed to release related to that big jump. So we had successive back-to-back releases. With this version, we introduced support for 4.2 SP09 and also support for Tableau 2021.2. In terms of features, for administrators, for those of you that use the InfoBurst reset schedule feature, you know that this is a feature that requires you to remote into the server, open a command line, and run the reset schedule program. That is now gone. If you use reset schedule starting in 2021.2, you can, in the system menu, so it's system configuration, and then under the general section, you'll see a setting called system schedule processing. You can see it pictured here on the top right. There's a button on that UI that says reset system schedule. If you click that, that's going to perform the system, or excuse me, the reset schedule. No longer have to log into the server and do it. Just click a button in the UI. Okay, workflows. So if you use InfoBurst, if you use bursts, you know that InfoBurst is very feature rich, right? You can get kind of lost in a burst in terms of the options that you have for bursting documents, multipass versus single pass, and all the various destinations and their options and formats and their options and actions and on and on and on. I could give a several hour presentation on what all you can do in a burst, but that breadth of functionality tended to confuse, let's call them business users. So novice users who aren't interested in all that complexity, they just want to perform a simple, specific task. How can they do that more easily in InfoBurst? Well, the burst is not the vehicle for them. It's too complex. So what we came up with are what are called workflows. And as it says there, the way we describe it is a business user-friendly interface for achieving something specific, right? So a common workflow would be Webby PDF to email. So we're going to present a UI that takes them through that process, kind of a wizard, step 1, 2, 3 kind of thing. And they don't have to worry about all the, well, what's this option and what's that option? It only does what the workflow was designed to do. So let me show you what that looks like in the user interface. Back to manage, and let's go up here. All right. So starting in 2021.2, in the drop-down menu, you're going to see a new kind of icon at the bottom, workflow. And the workflows that you have available will depend on your license type. And we'll talk about that just a little bit more in a moment. So if I select workflow, on the right-hand side, you can see all the various workflows that are available. And there are quite a few. And they are all specific to tasks and source documents or data, right? So for example, if I select, let's say, this hyper option, you can see we can support with these workflows Tableau in various ways. We can generate hyperfiles from Webby or a database query or a universe query, or we can even publish, well, in that case, it's actually Excel to Hyper. Or as another example, here's some Excel workflows where I can say, Excel to Power BI, lots of them. But the point is, these are kind of simplified ways to create common workflows. So let's look at an example here. Let's go with this. We'll do Webby publishing. So Webby, we'll just say PDF. So if I click on this workflow, I'm presented with a kind of a wizard interface. Now, I think most, if not all of you are InfoBurst users. And so I don't want you to be confused by what you're seeing. This isn't anything new in terms of functionality. It's actually under the covers a burst and a schedule and a document. But to make it simple for those business users, we're wrapping it all up in something we call a workflow and giving them a wizard interface. So let's walk through it together. The first step is to, in this case, we want to publish Webby. We need to go find a document. Now, if you're a burst user, the first thing you have to do is at new document. And once you have the document in InfoBurst, then you start building your burst. This workflow incorporates that. So we select our platform. We go out and select our document. I'll just select my weekly sales and continue. Okay, so the document has been added to InfoBurst, but that was all part of the workflow. If we have prompts, and I don't have any in this document, on step 2, we'd be presented with those parameters and we could supply values. In this case, we could also, we have the option to filter. I'll go ahead and filter. I'll just say, let's filter for city, and I want to use the values from the report. Then we define a delivery. So I'm just going to say, let's send this to email, and I'll just send this to myself as a simple example. Save that. So that's the destination. And at this point, we could leverage things like custom file names with macros, a custom email message. We can do things like with PDF format, select certain tabs. All those basic options are available. So that's the delivery. Then we move on to the scheduling. So this is going to look pretty standard to you if you use a schedule in InfoBurst. It's just part of the workflow. So we could say daily, Monday through Friday at, let's say, 8 a.m. All right, so save and continue, and that's it. Now you're going to notice on the left-hand side of this manage screen, you don't see a document or a burst or a schedule, but that's what this is. This workflow is a wrapper around a document, a workflow, and a schedule. But to make it more digestible for those end users, all they know is workflow. This is not a replacement for the burst. You may have noticed as we move through that workflow that there were options that you're used to in a burst that you don't see in a workflow. Well, that's because if we included all the options that are available in the burst, then there's no reason to have this workflow user interface. This is a highly specialized, a specific task that we're performing with the workflow. And we've come up with a set of workflows that we think make sense to business users. But we are always open to suggestions about what else would make sense to present to those users, right? Now from here, this is done. It's on a schedule. It's ready to run on that schedule. I'll just kick it off now because we can run it. It's a burst under the covers, so we can kick it off and run it and see the results. And we won't do that. We'll just leave it to run. Now, in addition to making this workflow available to those end users, we also give you the ability to simplify what they see when they log into InfoBurst. So as I log in here, I see all the monitor and search and all these things that as a workflow user, I may just want to log in, create my workflow, and be done. And so let's go over here to System. And I want to show you what we call a workflow user. So I've got this user here called Ringo. He's a team member. And here at the bottom, you can see the workflows that I've enabled for Ringo. So these are the things that I'm allowing him to do in terms of creating workflows. And these will be tied to your licensing. So if you don't have the Tableau add-on for InfoBurst, you won't see the Tableau option. Or if you're not a Power BI user, you won't see Power BI. I have a license that has them all, so I've enabled them all for Ringo. And then if I log in as Ringo, let's just log out. I'm going to come back to that third question, Kirk, in just a moment, because I think that's relevant. So here, as a workflow user, all I see are workflows and schedules are those things that I'm running. So I might want to look to see what ran or what's going to run in terms of my workflows. That's all I can see, nothing else. So if I come into the workflows folder, if I click new, I don't have 12 items that I can create actions and events and schedules and all that stuff. All I have are workflows. So we are seeing this adopted more and more for those that want to expose InfoBurst to end users, but in a limited fashion. But if you want to take advantage of features that are traditionally part of the burst, there's no reason that the user can't use a burst. They are essentially the same thing. So don't get confused by the two, and don't think that you're limited to just a workflow. A user can, let's call it, graduate if they have the proper training and leverage the full power of the burst and the full power of the schedule. And then our user Kirk asked the question, workflows stay container sized until they are broken apart, which is not undoable. And that is correct. So let me show you what he's talking about. 11:30. Okay. Let's log back in as me. So if I come back in here and look at the workflow, yes, the workflow is a container that is document, burst, schedule. And it is possible if we wanted to, let's say, graduate this workflow. So let's say we have this thing we've built, but we want to leverage a feature of a burst that we can't get to because we don't show it in the workflow UI, right? Simplified. We do have this option to unwrap the workflow. I'm going to do this live. We see how that works. Okay, so that's good. So you can see when I unwrap the workflow, now I see, we see our document, our burst, our schedule. So we can unpack that. So now we see all the various pieces, and then we can go in and do burst level things or schedule level things that we couldn't do in the workflow. And to Kirk's question, once you unwrap the workflow, you can't rewrap it. So just note that. Okay. All right, so let's move on to 2021.3, which came out in July of 2021. In this version, within what we call Managed Advanced, we introduced the ability to multi-select burst XTCs or schedules and either enable or disable them. Before you had to do that one at a time, now you can do it in bulk. If you have created burst deliveries where you have entered email addresses manually, then you can search by email address to show every burst that uses that email address. So let's move over to the UI and select the search option. And in this version, if you hover over, you can see that, well, actually it says name, search by name and email. In prior versions, it just said search by name. So here I can enter my address, and by default, we're searching bursts. And if I hit enter, I can see only those bursts that contain that address. So if I've got an address in 100 different deliveries, this might save me from having to go hunt through those deliveries to see where I've used that address. I can search, get back a list of those, and here I can click on the burst, and there's the delivery, and there's the address. So just note that you can search by address if it's been entered manually in the burst. If you're getting email addresses from an external source, like an Excel file or a database query, that does not apply. InfoBurst can't know at that point what's in those sources. We only get that information at runtime. So if you've entered it in the delivery, you can search for it. All right. Okay, let's talk about webhooks in 2021.3. What are webhooks? Webhooks give the ability for an application like InfoBurst to interact with and send messages to Slack or Microsoft Teams channels. So what would be a standard use case for this? I want to, if a burst fails, I want to send an alert message to a support Slack, Microsoft Teams channel. That would be a very common use case for webhooks. So I'm going to show you the feature. I'm not going to show you how to set it up. There is documentation in the help desk. If you just go in and search webhooks, you can see how to go into Microsoft Teams or Slack and get that webhook information that you can then use in InfoBurst to send messages to those channels. So let's switch over to InfoBurst. And what I'm going to show you is first at a system level under configuration and general. Actually, not general, it's under webhooks. You can see on the right-hand side, ahead of time, I've configured a channel in Microsoft Teams. So here at InfoSol, we have Teams, and we have a channel. I've created a channel called Demo, but that could be any channel you like. And I've gone in with the Microsoft documentation, and I've gotten what's called a webhook URL. This is the address that we can wire into InfoBurst so that it can send messages into that Teams channel. So with that configured, if we go back up here to Demo and webhooks, I have created an action, right? So for those of you that use actions, you know that you can create an action to do something based on the status of a job, a burst, a schedule, or an XTC, and then you can apply that to the required status. So here I've created an action that sends a message to the demo channel. And then I've also included a message that uses several macros. I want to report out the name of the burst, its status. I want to put a date stamp. And there's even a macro that allows us to, and it was designed for this purpose, to include a link from the message in the channel back into InfoBurst to show you the log. So imagine I'm going to send out an automatic alert when a burst fails. There goes a message into the channel. I can see what burst failed, when it failed. And I've also got a hyperlink that takes me back into the user interface and takes me right to that log section of the UI so I can see the log and start reviewing it to see why it failed. So here I've got a burst, and I've applied that action to the on abort status here. So let's see this in action. I'm going to run this. This burst is designed to fail. All right. Okay, so that failed for us. Actually, let's go back in there because I want to show you what that looks like in the log. So if I expand the log, you can see here at the end there. So the one step failed. There's InfoBurst sending the message out to a Teams channel. So if I switch over to Teams, there's the message that just came in. Yep, just a minute ago. And the macros resolve the burst name, the status, the date, and using that other macro, it's called the UI macro. And you can learn about that in the macro builder. If you select that macro, it'll tell you exactly how to use it. I basically formed a link back to InfoBurst. It's assuming I'm not logged in. And it takes me straight into Monitor, straight into activity logs, straight into the log. So I can click a link and be right in and see what ran. I can see why it failed, and I can start my troubleshooting. So that's support for Microsoft Teams, support for Slack, right? And Louise was just posed a question about setting this up. If you have any issues with the documentation, feel free to reach out to us by a ticket. We'll be happy to help you set this up. Okay. And actually, on a side note, with webhooks, we talked about in our previous webinar, in the first version of this year, 2022.1, the ability to send delivery notifications to Microsoft Teams or Slack. So let's say we deliver a file to SharePoint. You can opt in at the delivery level to say send a notification to a list of email recipients, letting them know that this file has been delivered. That used to be email only. Now with webhooks that was introduced the year before, you can send that same delivery notification to a Teams or a Slack channel. Okay, so the last feature we'll look at in 2022.1 is something we call promotions. What are promotions? This feature gives the InfoBurst administrator the ability to promote items between InfoBurst environments. So commonly that would be test or QA up into production. Items being bursts, schedules, XDCs, things like this. So before we jump in and take a look at that, I just want to direct you to the documentation on promotions. InfoBurst is a complex beast. I don't know how else to describe it. It's got, because it's so feature rich, doing things like promoting bursts and schedules it's involved, and you need to know what you're doing. And not in terms of just setting this thing up, but being aware of what you're promoting, what it has in it, and how that's gonna, does that make sense moving into a production environment? So to help you with this, let me just switch over here. Let's just go here and here. I just want to take you in there and show you the article. So if you go to help.infosol.com, just search keyword promotions. There it is. So this article is going to tell the InfoBurst administrator what promotions is, how to set up to use it, the requirements, which we'll get into a little bit more in a moment, and most importantly, the rules of promotions. This is really important for you to review before you start leveraging this feature, because there are rules that govern what you can promote, how it gets promoted, and what makes sense moving from a test environment to a production environment. So this document, we hope, will help guide you through that process. And if you need help with this, please reach out. Please log a ticket. Let us know what you're trying to do. We'll be happy to talk to you and guide you on the use of promotions. Okay, so let's actually do this. We'll do this live. Okay, so I want to take you through this process end to end. So here in, okay, so I'm in the InfoBurst system we've been using. Let's call that test, right? This is where I'm building and qualifying stuff like bursts. And what I'd like to do is take a burst that I've developed and promote it to production. So let's start out at the system level where we configure for promotions. And this is just a one-time thing, but I wanted you to see the process end to end. So if I come in here to configuration, in this version, you'll see from the dropdown a new section called promotion. And within that, we're going to configure. So we're in our source environment, which is test. We're going to configure our target environment, which is production. So here on this tab, I'm logged into a different InfoBurst environment. Let's call it production. Now, for purposes of demonstration, this is a blank environment. Now, this isn't what you'd be doing. You're going to have a real production environment that's got stuff in it. It's configured. It's doing things. But I think this helps you to see what's happening when we promote something. So I'm going to log into this fresh production environment that's got nothing in it. Right? There's no items. There's no platforms, no users, no nothing. Fresh environment. So I'm going to log out of that. And back over to our test environment, I want to set up this environment to promote into production. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to grab the base URL, which is just the server name and the port from production. I'm going to paste that here, save it. And this tells this system where that InfoBurst system is. And more importantly, it validates it. Okay, so we're automatically, it's checking the connection and it's validating the version. This is key because with promotions, the source system and the target system must be the same version. If they're different versions, so let's say test is running a newer version than production, then the promotion will not be allowed. And this is because InfoBurst is we're having a session today. We're talking about all the new features that come in every version. It's not practical to allow promotions from a newer InfoBurst version into an older system because you might be using a new feature that doesn't exist in that older version and it would break things. So a core requirement of promotions is the source environment and the target environment must be the same version, and they are, and so it's validated that said connected okay. So once we've set up to connect to the system, and again, that's a one-time thing, then we move on to promoting stuff. So I want to build something from scratch so we can just remind ourselves how this all works. So let's go into the promotions folder. I'm going to create a new burst. We'll call this test burst 46. We need to get going. Okay, so let's go over here. We'll add a document, just one document. We'll keep it simple. I'm just going to add a Webby report here. This Webby report has a parameter for state. Let's say we want to control that state parameter with values from a query. So I'm going to come over here to my data sources folder. I have a database connection and a query that gives me a list of states. Yep, we want to use that, and we'll save that. Then we'll set up a delivery. I'll just use a template for time purposes. So I'll go over here to my templates folder and I'll grab, say, our PDF to network folder template. That's that. Then let's just say we want to have an action. So we want to say on abort, we want to kick off let's say an email notification action that sends out an alert to email users. That one right there. All right, so pretty simple burst. Now we'd like to promote this into production. So let's go back up to system. And here for administrators, you see a new section called promotions. I click here, I don't have any. We're going to create a new one. Now you'll notice this little blue tag. We are calling this a preview feature because it is complex, and the numbers of combinations of things our users might try to promote is infinite, right? And so this tag is really to remind you that so long as we're in a preview mode, what we're recommending, and you'll see this in the documentation, is that production is being the repository is being backed up on a daily basis, once an evening, which should suffice. That way, just in case something unforeseen occurs, we have the ability to recover. So just note that. So new promotion, we'll give it a name. We'll call this promotion demo. And what do we want to promote? I'm going to go out into my demo folder, into promotions folder. I want to promote my test bursts. Super easy, right? When I select that, InfoBurst is going to go out and discover all the related items and settings, right? Because behind the scenes, there's a lot that went into creating this burst, right? We have a burst that has a Webby document in it. That document came from a platform. That platform may or may not exist in production. We have a data source, a query that's driving the parameter. We have a template that we use to create the delivery. We have an action that we're using on the abort status. These are all related to the burst we're promoting. So let's go ahead and promote that. Select our target server, which is production, and hit promote. It produces a log. This is more for our purposes, for troubleshooting in case that doesn't quite work. And let's go back over to production. So in this environment, there are no users. There was just admin. So as a user, I was created automatically because I own all the objects as Bryan. So my user record was created in production, which means I can log in there. So I use my account. Yep, I can log in. And what was a clean, fresh environment now has a bunch of stuff in it. At the system level, we created a platform, which the Webby report is associated with. There's obviously the new user, which is me, Bryan. Let's see, what else do we have? We had a template that delivered to the network. So we've got a new network folder that didn't exist here that got created. And I think there's even a parameter alias that was associated with that particular parameter in the report. So a lot of things got created behind the scenes that paved the way for the burst we created, right? And again, we had objects in various folders. I had my action in my actions folder, my database connection, my document, my template, all of that went into promoting this burst. A lot going on behind the scenes with promotions. Hopefully this is a feature that will make the process of developing things like bursts and schedules and getting them into production easier. So just make sure you review that documentation if you plan to use this feature. And again, by all means, if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to work with you. Okay, so let's come down here. We're running a bit short on time, so let's move through. Okay, 2021.4, the last version of 2021. This was released in October of last year. This version included support for Windows Server 2022, the latest version of Windows Server. For those of you that are Tableau users that use what's called the PAT or Personal Authentication Token, we introduced support for PAT at the Tableau platform level. There's another feature in 2021 that you may not notice. When users are creating schedules, right? So right now I'm on the Mountain Standard Time Zone. Let's just say my InfoBurst server is on the East Coast, and I'm going to set up a schedule to run at 10 a.m. When I say 10 a.m. to InfoBurst, I'm talking to the InfoBurst server that's 2 hours ahead of me. So it's not going to run at 10 a.m. my time. It's going to run at 10 a.m. Eastern time. This is the way InfoBurst has always worked. But that did prove confusing for some users. So we wanted to give users a little visual clue what they were scheduling when. So if you are a user of InfoBurst in, let's say, Monitor, or there are a few other parts of the UI that display this, if the server time is different from your local time, the server time will be displayed on that screen so that you know when you're scheduling, you're actually scheduling for the server time, not your local time. So just a subtle little visual hint about server time. Hopefully that helps folks out. And there's a new status at the schedule level. So Traditionally, you had an on start, on complete, and on abort. There are certain types of schedules that expire. So for example, if I have let's say a daily schedule that has an event with an expiry of 6 hours, if that event isn't set within 6 hours, the schedule expires. It doesn't run. And users wanted to know or be alerted in the event of an expired schedule. So we introduced a new status called on expire, to which you can apply any action you like. The most common use case would be, as you see on the screen, I want to send a notification to email or Teams that a particular schedule has expired. I might want to know that. I might want to know that the event never got set. So you now have this new on expire status in 2021.4. Features-wise, 2021.4, for those of you that use Tableau with InfoBurst, we introduced 2 new formats, the PowerPoint format and in Tableau, what's called the Excel crosstab format. If you use Excel extensions are the ability to take an Excel file from business objects, Tableau, some other source, and manipulate it, right? With, let's say I want to add column level grouping, or column level filtering, row level grouping. There's a variety of extensions that you can use to enhance that Excel that you've gotten out of your reporting environment. We've added to that list of extensions the ability to delete a column, right? So if you want to pull something out of that Excel, you can do that. Across the UI, we went through and tried to add ways to streamline the processes, right? Moving from one logical screen to the next. So you have the ability in this version to create a schedule from a burst. Really simple, but hopefully it's a time saver for users. Let me just show you what that looks like. So I'm going to go back in here, and this will work, weekly burst. So typically I've created my burst. Now I want to create a schedule. I would typically go new, schedule, I name the schedule, I then go browse for the burst to add. So click, click, click to create a new schedule for this burst. Now you can go to the burst tab. There's a hyperlink there that says create schedule weekly burst. And you can name the schedule whatever you want. We're just giving it a default name. But if I click the link, InfoBurst automatically creates a schedule, automatically puts the burst in it. Then you just need to configure your frequency and save, and you're done. So you're going to start to see these links throughout the UI that kind of take you to that next logical step, right? Saving you clicks. This one, I'm actually, I'm excited to show because I'm always surprised to see what our users do with InfoBurst. Years ago, we introduced the ability to take a query or a stored procedure, right? Run it, refresh it, or burst it, maybe it has a parameter, and then publish it as Excel or maybe HTML and deliver it. So, you know, we have business objects users and Tableau users and Power BI users, but there's always data out there somewhere in the enterprise that I want to just get it, refresh it, and send it out to people, right? So that query to Excel is what we introduced years ago, and I actually see that used a lot more than I would think, right? And so we know that users are keen to work with Excel and InfoBurst. So in this version, we introduced the ability to burst Excel. So imagine you have some other system that is generating these raw Excel files, and you want to take those and not just send them out to people, which you can do in InfoBurst, but you actually want to break them up. You want to burst them on a column and send those pieces out to different people. You can now do that in 2021.4. So let me show you what that looks like. Back here under demo and Excel bursting, I have this Excel file, which is just a bunch of raw data, and it happens to have a column for region. And I don't want to deliver this to everyone. I want to burst or break it up by region and then deliver those different region reports out to users. So I've added that region sales Excel file to InfoBurst, and I'm going to add it to a burst. This is another one of those links I was talking about. So if I'm looking at the document, I don't have to say new burst. I can just click the link and it creates a brand new burst for me with the document in it. So you've been able to add Excel to a burst for years for purposes of just delivering it. Now you can burst it. So here's my Excel file. If I expand the filters section and select add filter, I can see a list of the columns in the Excel file, and I want to burst on the region column. I say add. I'll add a delivery. Let's just go out and use a template. I have an Excel that delivers to a network folder. And let's just run that and you'll see what that looks like. I've actually talked to several users about this feature, and it's something that they're keen to use because they've got, again, they've got Excel in the enterprise that they need to burst and deliver, and now they can do that with InfoBurst. So if we come down here to our share folder, this was the original Excel file, and these are all the bursted versions. So you can see we bursted for region Asia, Europe. Here I'll open North America. So this is the same Excel file, but filtered, not filtered for, it's actually a new Excel file that has only North America data in it. So bursting of Excel you can do in 2021.4. Okay, tell you what, we're running a bit short on time. So I'm going to describe this feature for you. In 2021.4, we introduced our first support for Power BI. It's called a phase 1. And that phase 1 gives you the ability to generate from a Webby report, a business objects universe query, a database query, or Excel, a Power BI data set, and deliver it to Power BI servers. So you're essentially automating the production of data from business objects into Power BI for use in a Power BI report. So for those of you that are Power BI users, know that that's available starting in 2021.4. And as we'll talk about in our next webinar, in phase 2, in our next version coming out this year, actually, let's get to that slide. We'll get there in a second. Just a reminder, this recording recording of today's webinar will be available at events.infosol.com starting tomorrow, just in case you want to review the recording or share it with any of your fellow InfoBurst users. So as I said, the next InfoBurst webinar, we're going to be looking at the next version of InfoBurst due out. We're targeting the second week of April, InfoBurst 2022.2. That webinar is scheduled for April 21st at 1 p.m. Eastern. And you can sign up for that webinar at events.infosol.com. In that webinar, which we're going to do about a week after the release, we're going to be talking about new features. So in this version, we're introducing support for SharePoint lists. So I have a SharePoint list. I want to use that to drive my report bursting, or maybe I want to use it to drive my email deliveries. We can use SharePoint list as a data source. We can also use SharePoint or take a SharePoint list, publish it in, let's say, Excel or HTML, and actually deliver the SharePoint list content out to end users just like you would a Webby report. Custom calendars. You'll have a new scheduling feature in 2022.2, which is the ability to create a custom calendar. You can think of a calendar as like a delivery template where you're going to predefine a calendar based on your business rules. Then when a user goes to create a schedule, instead of configuring that schedule manually, they'll be able to simply select a calendar you've created for them, and that schedule is going to run on those predefined dates. So custom calendars you have to look forward to in the next version. There'll be another feature. I'm not going to go on about it today, but essentially, you're going to have the ability to define whether a burst retries in the event of a failure. And in the event that a burst has produced partial content, you're going to have the ability to rerun a burst that's maybe failed. Say I'm bursting for 100 cities and it failed 50 cities through. You're going to have the ability to turn on this recovery mode that says, don't rerun the burst for the 50 cities that worked because we've held that content. Go run it for the 50 that didn't work, and then deliver all the content. We'll get into this feature a lot more in that webinar. If you use database query to HTML, or as you'll have the ability to do in 2022.2, SharePoint list HTML, you'll be able to use custom CSS. Right now, you can define one CSS file that styles any HTML that you produce. In this version, you'll be able to produce multiple different CSS stylings and apply them at the delivery level in the burst. And then right back to Power BI. A lot of users are asking for this, and we're happy to be introducing this in 2022.2, which is Power BI publishing. Take a Power BI report, filter it by city, by region, produce those, let's say as PDF, and deliver them out to recipients, just like we would our Webby reports or our Tableau workbooks. That's coming in the next version. So that's our phase 2 of Power BI support. We'll just skip through this quick. We're right up against it. Announcements forum at help.infosol.com. Follow that forum. get automatic notifications when we release new versions, and we're at InfoBurst on Twitter. With that, I'm just going to go over here and scan our questions. I think we got to a lot of them as we talked. Kirk, I saw your question about CPU and RAM. I'm going to ask if you could reach out to us on the help desk. I'd like to ask you a few questions, and I can give you a proper answer to that. And that was related to your use of the review feature. Where in Teams does webhook URL appear? So, like I said, if you go into help.infosol.com, there you will find admin documentation on how to go in and get that webhook URL. If you need any help, just drop us a line in the form of a ticket, and I can make sure I get you that information. It's actually not too difficult to set that up in Teams. Luis asked the question, promotions, yay. Fair enough. Let's see. Can promotions, Kirk asked the question, okay, Kirk found it. Can promotions be used to migrate content such as moving from one server to a new server? Yeah, I mean, promotions is the ability to move something from one server to another. So it could be an existing production server. It could be maybe you're setting up a brand new production environment and you want to move things out of another environment. That's also possible. Reach out. Let's talk in detail about what you're trying to do, and we'll guide you on the best way to achieve that with promotions. Let's see. Actually, in the chat, I see a few questions. Let's see. Brent asks, will SharePoint lease be an add-on license? No, it will not. That's just something that you'll get with your existing license type. The Tableau functionality, the Power BI functionality, these do come in the form of add-ons. If you're an existing InfoBurst Enterprise or Publish user, if you're interested in that, please reach out to us at the help desk. We'd be happy to get you more information. So I don't see any of the questions, and my apologies for going a bit over today. We really appreciate you taking the time today to join us. We're very happy to bring these webinars back to you. We're going to be doing them on a very regular basis, and hopefully, getting you a lot more information about this product that you own and use, and hopefully increasing its value for you. So with that, thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you on the next webinar, and as always, have a nice day. Bye-bye.